Hello, sixth graders. Today we are looking at fractions and decimals and converting between the two. 3 learning targets you need to write down. I can write fractions as decimals. I can write mixed numbers as decimals. And I can write decimals as fractions. Okay, just some questions here for us to think about. Just think, you don't have to write anything down on this slide, but what do you know about our number system? What is our number system based on? And it might help you to think about place value. So when we think about our number system, like tens, hundredths, thousands, or going in front of the decimal, ones, tens, hundreds, what do we know about that system? Well, our decimal system is based on powers of 10. So as we move places, we're really just multiplying or dividing by 10. And then again, think, how will this help with converting between fractions and decimals to show equivalent numbers in different forms? So just something to think about as we're moving between decimals and fractions. How will our place values and our number system help us? Okay, so on here, let's write this down, writing what we read using place value. So write down this title, and then we're going to fill out kind of this chart. So in word form, 7/10. If I were to write that as a fraction, I know there needs to be a numerator and a denominator, 7 being the top number, my numerator, and tenths tells me that my bottom number is going to be 10. If I were to write this as a decimal, 7/10, it's telling me that it's ending in the tenths place, which is the first spot after the decimal. These two numbers, this one and this one, they are now equivalent. They're just written in a different format. So just simply taking it and how I read the word, writing it as a fraction and a decimal. So our next one, 32 hundredths. Well, 32 and our hundredths. And as a decimal, 32 hundredths, the hundredths ends in the second spot after the decimal. So my number here needs to end second spot after the decimal. So again, just taking what I'm reading, writing it in fraction and decimal form. 265 thousandths. Okay, so this is telling me my denominator, what place value we're in. We're in the thousands. And then the other part, 265, well, I just write that like how I know. And there it is as a fraction. As a decimal, that would end 3 spots after the decimal, tenths, hundredths, thousandths. So I write it just like that. If it was something like 2 thousandths, and it needs to end in the thousands place, that means I would just need to have zeros in front of it for it to end in the thousands. Just something to keep in mind. Okay. If the denominator of a fraction is 10, 100,000, or any higher power of 10, so 10,000s, 100,000, so on and so forth, you can use mental math and place value to convert. So write that part down with the example here. So the decimal, the numerator stays, and it's just in whatever place value it ends in. So we can move between the two. If it ends in the tenths, hundredths, thousands, so forth, then it very easily moves between a fraction and a decimal. Okay, so we have some problems here. We have fractions, and we need to convert them to a decimal. So to do that, we are going to try to get the denominator, the bottom number, to be 10, 100, thousands, or you could keep going from there. So steps here, write these down. First step, change the denominator. Like I said, get the denominator to be 10, 100, thousands. Multiply the numerator by the same number. So if the denominator was 5 and we multiplied it by 2 to get to 10, you would multiply the top number by that as well. And then we can take that and write it as a decimal. So 7/20. I know that I can multiply 20 by 5 to get to 100. Whatever I do to the bottom, I also need to do to the top. 7 times 5 is 35. So now if I read that, 35 hundredths, I can write that as a decimal. 35 hundredths. And then that's it. Next one, 5 3/4. So I have a whole number and a fraction. So this is what we call a mixed number. So I'm going to keep the whole number out front. That stays exactly the same. It just would be in front of the decimal. And now I'm just going to focus on the 3/4. So I know that I can multiply 4 by 25 to get to 100. So I multiply the top by that as well. 3 times 25 is 75. 75 hundredths. Well, just as it sounds, 75 hundredths. 75 ending in the hundredths place. And again, this 5 stays in front of the decimal. Okay. Now you pause, try these 3 on your own. Okay, 3/10. I know that it's already as a nice denominator. I don't need to change it at all. So 3/10, exactly as that sounds, a 3 in the tens place. And we always need a 0 in front for our placeholder in the 1 spot. 3/25, if I multiply by 4, I'll get to 100. So I do that on the top. So 12 over 100. If I read that number, 12 hundredths, just as it sounds, 12 hundredths ending in the hundredths place. 6 1/2. I know if I multiply this by 5, I will get to 10. Multiply the top by 5 as well. So 5/10. Again, the 6, this whole number, stays in front of the decimal. And then 5/10, a 5 in the tens place. If I had made this into hundreds, I would have got 50 hundredths, which would have looked like this. Same thing, just with an extra 0. But sometimes we're going to run into problems where it cannot easily convert to 10 hundred thousands. So then what do we do? Well, go ahead, write this down. Any fraction can be written as a decimal, just sometimes not as easily to convert. So to do this, we divide the numerator by the denominator. You will need to add a decimal and zeros to give yourself more places to work with. And division ends when the remainder is 0. Sometimes you'll have a repeating decimal, and then we can write it with bar notation. So write all of that stuff down. Write each fraction or mixed number as a decimal. So 3/8 doesn't easily, 8 does not multiply into 10 hundred thousands. So instead we're going to divide. So numerator goes on the inside, denominator on the outside. Now I'm going to have to add a decimal and some zeros. Now 8 goes into 30. 8, 16, 24, 3 times. Subtract. 8 goes into 60. 7 times, which is 56. I was having a brain fart there. 60 minus 56 is 4. Add a 0. This is just like our long division that we were learning about at the beginning of the year. 8 goes into 45 times. 5 times 8 is 40. Now it's done, nothing else to drop down, so 3/8 as a decimal is 0.375 or 375 thousandths. Try these ones on your own if you're feeling comfortable. 1/40th. Numerator goes on the inside, denominator on the outside. Okay, numerator, denominator. Add a decimal and a 0. Carry my decimal straight up above. 40 can't go into 10, so I add a 0. 40 goes into 100 2 times, which would be 80. 100 minus 80 is 20. Add a 0. So if I think of it, let's see, 40, 80, 120, 160, 200, that's 5 times. 5 times 40 was exactly 200. Nothing else to drop down, so 1/40th as a decimal is 25 thousandths. And the last one, 7 1/8. When I'm dividing, I'm just going to focus on the fraction. All right, numerator on the inside, add a decimal and a 0. Carry my decimal straight up above. 8 goes into 10 one time, which is 8. Add a 0. 8 goes into 20 2 times, which is 16. 20 minus 16 is 4. Add a 0. 8 goes into 45 times. Nothing else to drop down. So I need to keep this whole number out front. So instead of a 0 here, it's actually going to be a 7 and 125 thousandths. So that is 7 1/8 as a decimal. Okay, some vocab up here. Terminating decimal. This is a decimal that ends. So 7 5/10, 7.5. It ends. It's terminating. A repeating decimal is when it keeps going and it doesn't have an end to it. There is a pattern though, so it's going to keep repeating. So if it goes 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 1 5 forever, that's a repeating decimal. And then we can use bar notation to indicate that a number pattern repeats indefinitely. A bar is written over the digits that repeat and only the repeating parts. So some examples here. You should just write all of this top part down. But here, if you notice, the 3 does not repeat. So when we write it with bar notation, the bar only goes over the 8 and the 5 because that's the part that's repeating. Okay. So now let's try these ones. 7/9 doesn't easily turn into 10 hundred thousandths. So I am going to do some division. Numerator goes on the inside, denominator on the outside. Add a decimal and a 0. Carry the decimal straight up above. 9 goes into 77 times, which is 63. 9 goes into 77 times, which is 63. Oops. 70 minus 63 is 7. Add a 0. If you notice, we are having a pattern here, and it's just going to keep going. So instead of dividing forever, we can write this with bar notation. So since it's a 7 that's repeating, we can just write 0.7 bar over the 7. So 7/10 repeated. 3/11 does not turn into 10 100,000 by multiplying nicely. So I'm going to divide. Numerator on the inside, denominator on the outside. 11 can't go into 3, so that's how we end up adding a 0, a decimal and a 0. Carry the decimal above. 11 goes into 32 times, which is 22. 30 minus 22 is 8. Add a 0. 11 goes into 87 times, which is 77. 80 minus 77 is 3. Add a 0. 11 goes into 32 times, which is 22, which ends up with an 8. If you notice, I have a pattern going here. Okay, the 7 keeps repeating, so I would write that as 27 hundredths, bar notation over both the 2 and the 7 because both parts are repeated. So I don't have to keep dividing forever just until I notice that there's a pattern and stuff is repeating. Okay. Last one, 4 2/3. So again, I'm going to ignore the 4 and just take care of the 2/3. I can't turn that into a decimal easily, so I'm going to need to divide. Numerator goes on the inside, denominator on the outside. 3 can't go into 2. Add a decimal and a 0. Carry my decimal straight up above. 3 goes into 20 6 times, which is 18. 20 minus 18 is 2. Add a 0. Okay. 3 goes in 26 times, which is 18. If you notice, it's just going to keep going. So I keep the 4 out front of the decimal, and then 6/10 with the bar notation over the top. One thing to note, if you were to do this on your calculator and go 2 divided by 3, it would go 0.6666666, and at the very end it would have a 7. It does not actually end with a 7. We just found that if we kept dividing forever, there would just be 6s indefinitely. What your calculator is doing is it is rounding it up at the end, but just know the 6s do keep going forever. Okay, now we're going the other way, converting decimals to fractions. So go ahead and write this part down in your notes. Here's what we do. If it's a mixed number, the whole number stands alone. The numerator, that's the entire number after the decimal, and then the denominator is just whichever place the decimal ends in. And then we should simplify as well. So let's try it with these examples here. So the first one, if I read that, 26 hundredths, well, 26 on the top. Sorry, let me not use a highlighter. 26 hundredths, since it ends in the hundredths place, that's our denominator. Now to simplify, we're looking for numbers that they can both be divided by. They are both divisible by 2. 26 divided by 2 is 13, and 100 divided by 2 is 50. I don't think that they can simplify, so our answer, 13/50. Next one, if I read it, 1/10. So 1 with a denominator of, 10. Can't be simplified. Next one, 4 and 7 hundredths. That looks like a 7 comparing it to the 1 there. So the whole number stays as a whole number. And then 7 hundredths, 7 over 100. Last one, and that can't be simplified at all, so it's done. 2 and 125 thousandths. So the 2 stays as a whole number. And then 125, that's my numerator. And it ends in the thousandths place, so that would go as my denominator. Now I know both of those can be divisible by 5. So 225 divided by 5 would be 25, and then 1,000 divided by 5 is 200. Those could each be divided by 25. You could do divide by 5, but I know they can both be divisible by 25, so just skip a little bit. So 225 divided by 25 is 1. 200 divided by 25 is 8. So 2 and 1/8. So that's converting from a decimal to a fraction. Okay, so here's the steps. These you should make sure to have in your notes. From a fraction to a decimal. Okay, again, change the denominator to be 10, 100, or 1,000. And then change the numerator as well to make sure it's still equivalent. Otherwise, you have to do division. Numerator goes inside, and then add decimals and zeros. To move from a decimal to a fraction, if it's a mixed number, the whole number stands alone. The numerator is what's the decimal part, or the number after the decimal. And the denominator is whichever place value it ends in, and then simplify. So these 6 problems you are going to try on your own, and I'm going to look to see that these are in your notes. So have them labeled you try or you do, and then number them 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then try those problems on your own. So pause, try them, and then move on to the next slide. So look back over your notes to make sure that you have all of these things written down. Do you have the title, the learning target, vocab words and definitions, examples with the work shown, and then the problems from the end with the work as well. You can check your understanding on this lesson by seeing if this is something that you could explain to somebody else. Otherwise, re-watch parts of the video that you're still stuck on, or try more practice problems. You will use your notes to help you when you're completing the pages in the packet for this unit, during your Zoom sessions, during target checks or other assessments, so keep them, and I might be checking them during Zoom as well.